Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Led by Life. We're your hosts. I'm Rafaela. This is Hannah. And it's been a few weeks since we've recorded. And so here we are. Yeah, we're back. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. Hannah and I met roughly around a year ago. You were sharing that with me, and we met in a human design circuitry workshop, and we just instantly clicked, and we're both manifestors in human design, and we've just really loved all of the different parts of human design and the gene keys and talking about it and kind of doing like a deeper dive. So that's what we're here to kind of explore and journey through. And this week's episode is going through the 20th gene key, the 20th gate in human design. And yeah, that's where we're at. It's been a little bit, so coming back into it, it's feels new again, almost, in a way.
And both of our lives have felt a bit hectic lately, which is interestingly one of the shadow frequencies of this energy. Isn't it? Hectic.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Hectic.
And so it's just, again, funny how these things seem to align, or there's always some sort of synchronicity with our life experience and then whatever we end up talking about on the podcast. And yeah, I've just felt really like life has been really chaotic lately.
Do you feel like chaotic and hectic are different?
Chaotic, hectic. I don't know. Maybe they used a bit interchangeably, but they probably do have a different frequency to them. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like hectic. I can't remember exactly, what's shared through the gene keys of this shadow expression, but I feel like hectic is more so of this frustration, almost like too much going on, not like that they're not unnecessarily, but that it's just too much.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that the shadow is superficiality, which you wouldn't really, I probably wouldn't normally correlate, or relate superficiality with hecticness or chaos or busyness. But it's interesting because he talks about superficiality being like the lack of space for consciousness to come in. So it's almost like this kind of superficial, this small container for consciousness to come through. And it really does make sense when you contrast it with the higher frequencies, like the gift of, remind me what the gift is.
Self-assured.
Self-assuredness. Again, that doesn't really, like the word, until you dive a little bit deeper, it doesn't really seem to kind of relate. But the Siddhi of presence, like I think of this like big spaciousness that comes with present. And it's like this big space for consciousness to come through. And I really like how he compares the shadow frequency to like insects and the busyness of the insects. So tell me a little bit about like what kind of came up for you.
Well, to be honest, I read it quite a while ago. But one of the things I just remember was feeling as if I really related, even though I don't have it defined in my chart. And I feel like that's because it comes out of the throat center, which both you and I have defined. So in that sense, it was interesting. But yeah, going back to what you mentioned of like him, just Richard Rudd describing like how it relates to an insect. I almost thought of it like being a very intelligent, complex system, and yet it's still so simple. Like the life of an insect, it's not superficial, but on a certain layer, it's if we were to like compare it with humans, it doesn't complicate it. I don't know, like they don't have a complexity, and in that, but yet they do. So I'm being like very contradictory in what I'm saying. But again, like, I was saying it was something about this one. I think I'm remembering now that there was something about how like it really can't be intellectually understood. Right. So again, it's very interesting, right? How I'm sitting here trying to like explain or articulate what it is that I have like taken in from the Gene Keys perspective of the 20th frequency. However, I do know that on a visceral level, reading through this Gene Key, I felt very much like I related, because it talks about I guess when I think of superficiality, I think of the opposite of depth is what really comes to me. And then there were some qualities in here about trust and surrender, and patience, and all of these things that kind of make up the ring or something like that. I can't even really remember. And I was like, okay, yeah, I feel like these are a lot of like qualities that I really try to practice to bring into my own life. So in that sense, I related. And also it being something that comes out of the throat center, I felt like I could see how this presence comes about with a lot of the different things that I embody or express when I speak. So again, it was just something that I more so felt.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I related to like the busyness, or perhaps my perception of this. Would you call it like an analogy of the insects, or this example of like the busyness of insects, and this idea of superficiality being, it's almost like it seems like just taking action for action's sake, and the action's not really
Yeah.
that it lacks depth. It's not all that like important. It's just this busyness. And I think that maybe another reason why we relate to it so much is that we see it so widespread in society. Like we see how like this pressure to be, and I know it's not coming from the root of the sacral, but it just like feels like this kind of need to be doing stuff all the time and to be keeping busy.
Right. Well, I mean, if you think about it, you're right. It's not really a pressure center, but it is like the center in which everything is meant to be manifest through.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, it almost does still carry this quality of pressure of like something being like pushed out of the,
Yeah. Yeah, and like it shows the shadow of humanity that still exists, where it's like this lack of trust in allowing life to flow, and feeling like this sense of, or this perceived sense of control of our lives by like worrying about little things and focusing on the little things and getting caught up in busyness and action, because of this fear or this lack of trust in life just flowing and things coming to us as they need to, and like life taking care of us. That was kind of what I got from it. And then you look at it almost only really makes sense when you look at it as a whole, like from the shadow and the Siddhi, kind of see the contrast between the different frequencies, because presence really in its purest form is just this complete trust and ability to be with the present moment.
Right. You know, you kind of reminded me of how, like, in the time that we had to reflect on this for this episode, I had found myself in some, I wouldn't say that I felt, well, hectic, maybe, but hectic with a whole lot of unnecessary like hecticness of the mind, really. And so in the last couple of weeks, I've just kind of been um still feeling this unsettledness with going through such a big change in life, and like feeling as if um this thing that I'm doing, how can I change it around so that it fits for a future experience, and just kind of like getting a couple steps ahead of like really where I need to be, and allowing that to kind of give me some worry, and maybe, yeah, like doing things not from the right action,
Yeah.
not necessarily taking that right step. And I've just kind of been able to observe that a little bit more. And so it's interesting because as I was reading this, and as I'm reflecting back even on how I've kind of like noticed myself navigating through life most recently, the one thing that always brings me back to just being more at peace is bringing myself back to like the present moment,
Yeah.
which you and I talk a lot about. I feel like each time there's just more and more acknowledgement of how impactful being present and being mindful
Mm.
really is for us, especially if we're like finding ourselves doing or trying to fill spaces or time just because we can't be still.
Yeah. Well, I noticed myself just take a deep breath. And like the breath, he even talks about it being, as you move into the gift and the Siddhi state, you kind of do relax into the breath, and your breath like expands or deepens.
Mm-hmm.
And breath is like our entry point into the present moment. It's what really brings us back, coming back to our breath. And I think we talked, you even just mentioned before about the mind, getting caught up in the mind. And he did say as well, like, we're moving away from this mental state that we've been caught up in, and moving into this solar plexus energy, the energy of the solar plexus. So I think it is all relevant, even regardless of which energy center this gate sits in. It's all relevant. And you said something really profound to me the other day. I don't know if you really realized it, but you said to me something like, I'm noticing how I'm stressing over things that don't unnecessarily, like you're noticing that you're getting caught up, or you're making things more stressful than they need to be. I think that's what you said. And then I recognized that in myself I had this awareness after you mentioned that. And I just have to keep coming back to like, where am I right now?
Mm-hmm.
Is life asking of me right in this very moment? And it almost dissolves that stress, that unnecessary stress, through just like coming back to the present moment.
Yeah.
And it really is a practice.
I don't think like when you say it's a practice, it's almost like I go into like a time portal of how I have journeyed through meditation practices that are more calm and still, and breath work, and being more easeful or trusting or patient. And it really does take like repetitive action in order to allow this to be just more present in your life. And I was actually sharing with a friend today that in that same time that I was talking to you about me making things harder for myself and just being so acutely aware of it, I kind of like blurted out all of my thoughts and everything to another friend of mine. And I think that that's what ended up kind of giving me this ability to step back and then share that reflection with you. I kind of like just said it all out where I was with no judgment and just let it be. And I kind of came to this realization that like, wow, we can overthink the shit out of things. And I told my friend, I was like, I actually feel like my overthinking has been so much better than it was years ago. Because I could think through things or think over things, around things, like just way too much, way too much. And I feel that that was maybe it's a gift. I feel like obviously having a defined ajna, I have this, just you as well, this ability to conceptualize and analyze and have opinions and ideas. But again, it's not always serving me if I turn that around towards myself. And so it's just really nice to be able to reflect on how much progress I've actually have made and catch myself in it so much quicker. Like even, yeah, and even in today when I feel like I woke up and my mind was just going, and I can notice like, should I do this or do I want to do that, and my body didn't really want to get out of bed, so I didn't. I slept. I like almost quieted my mind down by going back to sleep. And when I woke up, I took the most immediate next right action that was meant for me. I didn't need to do any more or any less than what I did. I woke up, I meditated, I left, and I went to work. And I felt so much better than when I had originally woken up and was just like letting like everything kind of like consume me and feeling like I was making it more complicated of like, but I hadn't like even like got out of bed yet.
Yeah, we overcomplicate it so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really what the shadow speaks to, like overcomplicating life. And he even mentioned something about, we have this nostalgia with the good old times and we think, when life used to be so simple, but it's like we do kind of romanticize this idea of life being really simple, but actually back then we weren't as evolved, and we didn't have as much like conscious, we weren't as conscious and we weren't, it was more, I feel like I'm not explaining it very well, but it was more like barbaric times.
Yeah.
Yeah, life was simple. We weren't overthinking as much, perhaps. We were more instinctual, but we also were very animalistic or like simplistic in that sense. But I don't know, I get this feeling, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as well, but I get this feeling like, wait, we are going back to simple times, but we're going back to simple times with this evolved consciousness and awareness. And so it is more presence, it is more mindfulness, or more all of the Siddhic or the higher frequency states we're kind of moving into, but it is also going back to simplicity as well. Did that kind of make sense?
Yes, because I know what you mean, you know, in the sense of like, what comes to me immediately is us not necessarily feeling like we have to do things do more than what we're doing right now. I was just kind of looking over, and the human design gate is called the gate of the now. And this is one of those gates that actually connects to, was it 3 different centers in the so it's like part of like the integration channels, where this gate 20 connects to, this gate 20 connects like 3 different parts in the chart. But what I'm saying is, like, it's the gate of the now. And I think ultimately, like, anything that you're doing in that moment is really the only thing you can be doing in that moment. So if I'm constantly trying to like do this thing and do this thing and fill my time with this thing, then when I think about it, and the first word that popped back up for me was this idea of superficial. Like, nothing's really thought out or thought through, or it's just kind of like this immediate conditioned response to feel like, let me do this now, but on top of doing this now, I have to do all of these other things now. And to bring it back to like this analogy of the insect, an insect isn't necessarily saying like, let me carry this piece of food and build my house at the same time. And he refers to the insects and in nature in the sense that they have this deep intelligence to know, like, they don't have to do, they just have to be. And like, that's something I feel like I've worked with a lot recently. And it's always just in the present moment where I recognize, like, oh, that this is coming up. And it's just constantly moment by moment. And so I feel that sometimes people, like when people say that like they're really great at multitasking. I always want to laugh. I'm not here to say that you can't do 3 things at the same time. Maybe you can, and maybe some people work very efficiently. But I feel like, kind of back to one of our previous discussions, what if that's always also like what's leading us to burnout, or just like always constantly tired, or just overworked mentally?
Well, what's it all for? Like, what are we trying to achieve by doing so much at once?
Yeah.
Like, sure, you can feel like you're more productive, but I think we know that when we're really focused and present with one thing, it's always going to be done to the best of our ability if we're just focused on what is. And I talk about this a lot with my meditation students, is this idea, like this feeling that people have that slowing down will slow them down, will slow down their progress. And I often say, like, when we are so busy and we're rushing, that's when mistakes happen. That's when I notice it myself when I spill things, when I'm not being present. And I know I've talked about this before, like, I have a tendency to spill things, and it's always when I'm distracted or I'm not fully present. Like, when I'm really dropping into this presence, it's so intentional. Our action is so intentional. And this is where we can really like take that right action that he talks about. I think it comes from the Buddha, this notion of right action. And I just love this because it's like, we're always going to see what needs to be done in the moment if we can loosen our control, loosen our grip, and let life show us what's the next thing, what's the next right action. And that's just feels so much more intentional, and like you can just relax into knowing that you don't have to rush around trying to do all these things at once. And this is where injuries happen. This is where mistakes happen. Some of the women that I work with are on a fitness journey, and so they're working out in the gym, and you have to be so focused when you're lifting weights or when you're doing some sort of like exercise. And this is where yoga is like such a beautiful practice of a moving meditation, because it's really inviting in this presence and sinking into connecting with the breath, connecting with the body, focusing on what you're doing. And yeah, like, yeah.
I noticed that the both of us have this thing, and maybe tell me if I'm wrong for you, but like we'll talk and then that'll be the end of the sentence, but there's nothing else.
There's nothing more to say. Yeah.
um my friends used to tell me how like I was they were obviously being sarcastic, but that I was a great storyteller because I'd get to this part of I'm like, just that's the end of the story. And they're like, wow, great story, Rafa. But so as you were speaking, this moment like came back to me of the other day where for whatever it was, like I had gotten into a moment where I was like intensely annoyed, almost angry, but not really. But I was just very annoyed. And I just knew that like I couldn't speak. And I was trying to be as present with it as possible. And so I was just there and I realized like that this emotion was clearly present and it needed to do something. And me being like an open emotional, I have to just let the feeling, like whether it's coming from me or the outside, like I have to just feel the feeling, like the full course of it, and then I'll be fine. It's almost it kind of scares people actually a little bit, because it's almost like I can go from one end to the other super fast, or like back down to like neutral really fast. And so anyway, this thing was going on and I was like, okay, fine, I'll just lay on the couch. And I laid on the couch and I put my head down and I just kind of like had some breaths and I realized like that I just feel like I feel annoyed and I'm kind of like upset. And for me, that usually turns into like me crying. I'm a big crybaby. Like most emotions on that scale, like will usually lead to me being in some tears for the most part. Sometimes. And so I needed a few minutes to like literally let the tears just flow and then just say what it is that this emotion was like, where it was coming from, and just like acknowledging it. That's really it. And then after that, it was fine. And I've just been recognizing of like how each moment when you're kind of like brought into a new emotional shift or experience, is just kind of reflecting something to you to that moment. And I've learned that for me, the best thing to do is like let it out somehow, whether it's like typing it crazily in my phone or just like venting it out loud to myself or in a voice note or to a friend. Almost like the same thing that I had shared with you like earlier in this episode of talking to a friend and just kind of like non-judgmentally allowing myself to like blurt out whatever needed to come out. And then I like shared a little bit with you and I walked around the block and I was fine. It's like, but if I would have let that carry into like further moments, I just feel like I'd be stuck. And I don't like that feeling. Like for me, I don't like carrying things to the next moment that don't need to be there. I mean, this is just a personal preference of mine, but I feel like this is where those concepts that he illustrated, such as cultivating trust and patience and surrender. I'm just going to read it because it's just so beautiful. It says the 20th gift can only be cultivated through trust, patience, and surrender, none of which are techniques. As such, self-assurance is based upon a philosophy of allowing everything to come to you rather than going out and chasing life down. It is because of this that divine laziness, that the 20th gift is the real foundation for inner relaxedness. And that's what I feel like if I was able to trust that moment. I didn't concoct this big, deep distrust with quite honestly, like my significant other. I didn't do that. Or with the situation in which we are, like, yes, it had a lot to do where I am in life, but I didn't immediately like react and reject everything that's right in front of me. I was given patience. I gave myself patience. I surrendered to that feeling that was really, really inside of me, like in my emotions, in my body. And then I was relaxed.
And what happens is that it passes.
Yeah.
And then the next moment comes. And then the next moment will show you what needs tending to. Like, this is what we can really learn from presence, I think, and dropping into the present moment, is that whatever needs to be tended to in the present moment will appear. And so if we can be present with it, not stuck in the past, what has happened, or caught up in what is coming, if we can just be present with what is, then life will show us what it wants us to tend to. And maybe that is an emotion that needs to be felt. And I had a really similar experience the other day as well. Like, I had this overwhelming sense of anger. And I'm really learning to own my anger. I think that we've really been taught that anger is a negative emotion. And I can understand why. Like, it can be scary when you're in the presence of someone who's angry and you don't know what's going to manifest or come out of that anger. I understand that, but I'm also owning that, like, my anger isn't something that I need to be afraid of or ashamed of, and it's just a communication. It's a communication that something is getting in the way and there's some form of resistance. And I think that really is what the anger, the not, they call it the not self, but I don't even really like that term, like the not self of anger, because it's just showing me, there's so much for me to see in that anger. Just need to be with that feeling. I just need to be with that feeling. And I took myself out of the apartment when I was feeling it. And I went to the park and I took my shoes off and my socks, and I put my feet on the earth, because that is all I felt like I could do in that moment. And I just sat with that anger, and then I just felt better. But what happens is, if we push that emotion down because we feel like we shouldn't feel it, we feel ashamed for feeling angry, we feel afraid of our anger, or whatever the emotion is, it gets suppressed, and then it's going to come up, it gets bottled up, and it's going to come up and come out in some kind of, who knows what
Incorrect
way.
action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in that moment, all I had to do was tend to my anger with love and just be with it and tend to myself. Like, it's okay that you're feeling angry right now. Just breathe, come back to your breath, breathe, get your feet on the earth. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. And I can see now, like, why I've been feeling more emotional lately. Like, even just talking this out, I can see that I have been busier. I've been more hectic. Life has been more hectic, and it's brought up, it's showing me in a more amplified way these emotions that want to be felt, or these things that want to be tended to, because this hecticness is kind of amplifying that experience. It's easier to feel more peaceful when life is less busy.
Well, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Let's look at that, because as I'm like, this is, maybe we can find this wherever we are.
Yeah, that's what it is. Because even as you were saying, I was like, isn't it incredible how, I mean, these are just our experiences, but how isn't it incredible just like how we can kind of shift when we get in the now, no matter what's happening. Whenever we get back into the present moment, then there afterward, it's calmer until the next moment and the next moment, and you're in the next moment. And, because although I have like this morning, I've been pretty busy. You know, my schedule looks different. I actually have a couple different things going on right now. I've been more busy than I have been in the last 3 years, kind of, in a way. And this morning, when I sat down to meditate, I recognized that I was really in a moment of peace. And it was in my meditation that I felt peace. And it's just very interesting to me how the rest of the day has gone. It has been a little hectic, not gonna lie. My attention was kind of grabbed in different places, and I wasn't necessarily, there was moments where I wasn't like focused, but I think that all of this brings this back to this quality of the gift of being self-assured. Is like this deep knowing that in whatever moment you are in, like that you will be okay. This self-assuredness of like, I'm here and I'm with this, and that's it. This is it. There's no good, there's no bad, but there's capacity to just be in it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's our mind that tells us that we need to be stressed because it's so busy. It's the mind that gets attached to those stories of chaos and overwhelm. Yeah.
Feel pretty present.
Me too. I noticed myself relax a lot more through this conversation. At the start, I felt like a bit of this pressure and this overwhelm. Yeah. But that's life, isn't it? There's always going to be different ebbs and flows, and it will always ebb and flow, and there's always going to be seasons of busyness and seasons of stillness, and like, can we still find presence and calm amongst it all?
I think we can.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, I think that wraps up the 20th.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if anybody has any feedback or just kind of insights of what this energy is like for yourselves, like I mentioned, Hannah and I don't have this gate frequency. However, we do have a divine throat, so I feel like a lot of it was still very relatable to our experiences. But yeah, until next time, guys.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks.